All right, let's dive right into this explainer. We are tracing the magnificent journey of a tournament that literally stops time for half the planet. I mean, we're talking about an event so immense, it halts civil wars, empties city streets, and completely dictates the collective mood of entire continents. So today, we're unpacking the complete story of the FIFA World Cup. We're going to move way past the basic stats to really explore how this quadrennial gathering evolved into the most culturally dominant and honestly emotionally resonant sporting event in human history.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with one game, billions of dreams, then look at the beginning of the World Cup, move on to Brazil and Pelé's magic, revisit some great players and memorable moments, and finally wrap up with the modern era and future.
So let's jump right into part one. One game, billions of dreams. It really makes you wonder, right? How exactly did a sport that was just mildly popular in 19th century Europe and South America transform into this massive stage where poor children can literally become global legends? It's a fascinating evolution. Back in the 19th century, football was basically disorganized mob football over in England. It was rough, highly localized, and totally lacked universal rules. But as it spread rapidly via sailors, merchants, and railway workers across Europe and down into South America, it started to take shape. And the massive leap from those chaotic, muddy pitches to a highly sophisticated global diplomatic tool, well, that didn't happen overnight. The real challenge was taking those fiercely independent, isolated regional games and somehow forging them into one unified platform.
Which brings us to part two, the beginning of the World Cup. To understand the genesis of that global platform, we really have to look back at 1904. Now, the Fédération Internationale de Football Association, or FIFA as we all know it, wasn't born at some massive global powerhouse. Actually, scratch that. It was far from it. It was formed in Paris by just 7 European nations. And what's absolutely fascinating here is who was missing. The English, the very inventors of the modern game, initially just outright refused to join. They essentially didn't want outsiders controlling what they considered to be their game. But those 7 founding nations pushed forward anyway. They were driven by an incredibly ambitious dream to create a stage where every single nation could eventually showcase its strength on equal footing. But man, that ambition faced some incredible hurdles. Following the inaugural World Cup in 1930, the tournament was gaining massive momentum. Right up until 1939, the outbreak of the Second World War brought global sports to a devastating halt, and the football stadiums sat completely empty for over a decade. But the sheer resilience of the tournament, it's just incredible. Get this, during the war, FIFA Vice President Ottorino Barassi secretly took the physical World Cup trophy from a bank vault in Rome and hid it inside a shoebox right under his bed, literally under his bed, just to keep it safe from the Nazis. That literal preservation of the prize ensured that the passion for the game stayed fiercely alive, leading directly to the tournament's triumphant return in 1950. Looking back at that very first tournament in 1930, only 13 teams participated. And a lot of people wonder, why was Uruguay chosen over the much more established European nations to host? Well, the real insight there is purely logistical and financial. Uruguay desperately wanted to host to celebrate their centennial of independence, so they boldly offered to pay all travel and accommodation expenses for the competing teams. Remember, in 1930, transporting an entire football team across the Atlantic via steamship was a massive, costly feat. It was there, with Uruguay ultimately defeating Argentina, that football proved it could serve as a powerful symbol of national identity. And that laid the groundwork for the massively expanded, highly lucrative global roster we're used to seeing today. Moving on to part 3, Brazil and Pelé's magic. So when the tournament fully hit its stride in the 1950s, the world was introduced to an unprecedented prodigy. I mean, we all know the legend of a 17-year-old Pelé taking the world by storm at the 1958 World Cup. But what's truly mind-blowing is that he almost didn't play at all. He actually arrived at the tournament nursing a severe knee injury. And on top of that, the Brazilian team psychologist insisted that the young player was too immature and just lacked the fighting spirit necessary for the immense pressure of a World Cup. Thankfully, the management completely ignored that advice, and a 17-year-old kid stepped onto the pitch to completely rewrite the sport's history. Driven by that youthful magic, Brazil didn't just win. They completely revolutionized how the game was played. Up until then, European football was heavily tactical, rigid, and, somewhat stiff. But Brazil? They introduced the world to Ginga, a rhythmic, fluid style of movement heavily inspired by the Brazilian martial art of capoeira. They literally turned the sport into pure flowing art. This approach completely captivated the globe.
establishing Brazil as football's undisputed superpower, and changing the aesthetic expectations of the beautiful game forever. All right, let's look at part 4, great players and memorable moments. As the decades progressed, the tournament really became the ultimate canvas for individual brilliance. It produced stories that showcase the extreme duality of the sport. Take 1986, for instance. Diego Maradona led Argentina to become champions, sure, but it was the quarterfinal against England that truly defined his legacy. In the exact same match, just 4 minutes apart, he scored the infamous, deeply controversial Hand of God goal, and then followed it up with the breathtaking goal of the century. Unbelievable, right? Then, in 1998, we saw the incredible unifying power of the tournament when Zinedine Zidane led France to victory on their home soil. That win served as a powerful cultural unifier for a previously fractured French society. By the time Brazil reclaimed the throne in 2002, it was crystal clear that every single iteration of this tournament delivers its own unique, legendary flavor. And that brings us to our final section, Part 5, Modern Era and Future. Stepping into the 21st century, the dynamic of the tournament shifted massively. The modern era was largely defined by the titanic rivalry between Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo. But what truly amplified their impact was the unprecedented explosion of global broadcast rights and social media. Suddenly, billions of us could track their every move and debate their merits on a daily basis. And this multi-decade narrative culminated beautifully in the 2022 World Cup in Qatar. Messi fulfilling his ultimate dream to make Argentina champions didn't just end a debate. The final match itself, filled with wild momentum swings, is now widely considered the absolute greatest match ever played in the history of the sport. Looking forward, the 2026 World Cup brings an entirely new logistical and competitive reality. We are moving from 32 to 48 teams, completely changing the traditional format. Hosted across 3 massive nations, the United States, Canada, and Mexico, this expansion fundamentally alters the scale of the whole event. Now, while some purists might debate the dilution of the competition, this expanded roster finally opens the door for underdog nations who have never even qualified before. It promises fresh narratives and entirely new players arriving to break decades-old records. But ultimately, if we strip it all back, the essence of the game remains incredibly pure. A small ball, a massive pitch, billions of dreams. Whether you are lucky enough to be sitting in a packed, roaring stadium, or you're huddled around a glowing phone screen thousands of miles away at 3 a.m., the connection is exactly the same. It's a shared space where a single goal can instantly rewrite history, and where an impoverished child can rise up to command the attention of the entire planet. The World Cup is not just football, it is emotion. When the world unites every 4 years, speaking with one collective voice, it's this shared, powerful human emotion that anchors the whole spectacle. But it leaves us with a fascinating question to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. As we enter a completely new era of expanded, massively distributed tournaments and digitally consumed fandom, the real question isn't just who will lift the next trophy. It's whether the pure, unbridled emotion of the 20th century game can truly survive the massive commercial scale of the 21st.